That's what I was going to ask, because if I'm a policymaker or a voter and I'm listening to this skeptically, I might be sympathetic to your anecdotes, and I might be trying to find ways, even very well-reasoned ways, to sort of poke holes and be like, not everyone who's abused is using heroin, and there are ways in which you can get physically addicted to drugs even if you're not traumatized. There are mechanisms within the substances. All of this is true, but how does the larger pool of evidence, what kind of a drug policy reform do you think that the larger scale evidence, the academic evidence, supports?
Well, there's a wealth of evidence. There are 20 academic studies that I'm aware of that come up with the same figures in relation to specifically heroin, that 2/3 of problematic heroin users are self-medicating for childhood trauma, and that childhood trauma includes sexual and physical abuse and neglect. Those studies, 20 studies, and they come up with the same figures. And the fact that it's the same figures is quite fascinating. The other third of them, many of them are self-medicating for undiagnosed mental health conditions. They're struggling to deal with undiagnosed neurodiversity or other adult-caused trauma that they're self-medicating for. And yes, there is a chemical relationship with opioids in the fact that you can have a withdrawal. But that is not what is causing the addiction, and the evidence is very clear on that, that there is an extraordinary wealth of evidence to support that. But there's also, we shouldn't just look at the academic evidence, we should look at history, we should look at how things have changed. And the UK is a perfect example of where we should look at change, because there used to be two schools of thought internationally. There was the American model of drug control and the British system. And the British system, capital B, capital S. And they were opposing worldviews. The British system meant that if you developed a problem with drugs, you went to a doctor and you got help. That was the foundation principle of the British system. And what that meant for heroin or cocaine, that if you became addicted to them, you would be given a clean supply of those drugs. You would be given that drug supplied by a doctor. And that meant we didn't have a heroin problem. We didn't have it because organised crime wasn't involved. There wasn't any incentive to find vulnerable people and sell them heroin. There's no incentive because doctors were controlling it.
What someone might say, actually what someone did say when I asked for questions to this episode is like, how did that affect the crime associated with drug use? A lot of people finance their drug use by doing other types of crimes, and they usually say that, well, how would legalization affect this? What would you say to that?
Well, I mean, that's a broad question because I'm specifically talking about heroin here, which is a particular problematic drug for crime. It's very different to regulating cannabis, of course. But since in terms of heroin, there was no crime associated with the drug at all under the British system. Because why would there be? It was provided free from a doctor. So there's no crime, no need to commit crime for it. And if it's provided by a doctor, you've not got this daily fight to try and find money for it. So you've got space in your life for other things. You have a chance at healing. And people did heal.
You didn't get a job, maybe.
Yeah, well, the people were functioning. At the end of the 1960s, when the British system was finally shut down by the imperial might of American international policy, and it was shut down because we owed the United States so much money after World War II, which made them a true superpower, and they told us what to do. So when the British system was shut down, there was 1,046 heroin consumers in the UK. 1,046. The number was falling. In less than 15 years, from the moment that market was handed to organised crime, we had 300,000. 300,000. Very clear cause and effect. Because it's in the interest of organised crime to find those vulnerable people. It's in the interest of organised crime to put pressure on user dealers to find more customers. And people in emotional pain will find that comfort. So it's a cause and effect.
That's an
We've
insane
created this
number.
monster. Yeah, it is. It is. And that's a piece of history. Now, we had a slight revisit of the British system just in Merseyside near Liverpool between 1982 and 1994. One doctor was doing it. And all of his patients, his sex workers, stopped doing sex work. His people got jobs because they were having regular prescriptions and they didn't need to commit crime. They were all well. No one died at all for those 12 years. But then the doctor doing it did a 60 Minutes documentary in the States because he wanted to evangelise about this. He wanted to explain the good news that we can save lives. The American government then got in touch with the British government and said, what are you doing in your country? And shut it down. the next day, he was shut down. And not only was he shut down, he was blackballed. He couldn't get a job as a psychiatrist in the UK. He had to emigrate to New Zealand. It's called John Marks. So it was all stopped. Within 2 years, most of his patients were dead. 40 people died, just like that, because the medicine was stopped. They were back on the streets, back exploited by organised crime. But the evidence that he collated got onto the desk of the new health minister in Switzerland, the brilliant Ruth Dreyfus. And she took that evidence to persuade the Swiss public of the way to go. And so that year, in 1994, Switzerland started prescribing heroin, like the British system. And as a result, they got rid of their heroin problem. They got rid of it. Their burglaries dropped 50% through the 1990s, at a period when every other European country was having an epidemic of crime. They cut their crime, they saved lives, and now they don't have a heroin problem because the state's in control. It's regulated.